All right. Hello. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be here with Dr. Esme Dark. Um, we had a few conversations around collaborating on this podcast. You have your own podcast, Beyond the Trip. And we thought it would be fun to just collaborate on this live stream, this live podcast, and I think start talking about policy around Australia, also the US. I think I always find it fascinating that it feels like Australia beat us to the legal framework. So, Dr. Dark, can you just introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kyle. So I'm Dr. Esme Dark. I'm a clinical psychologist and a somatic psychotherapist, and I've worked as a psychedelic therapist on research trials here at the Clinical Psychedelic Lab at Monash University and on some clinical projects. And so, yeah, I'm kind of really excited to be here today. I've followed psychedelics today for a long time. It was I really wanted to start a Beyond the Trip podcast to kind of highlight, I guess, what's going on here in Australia as we roll out the regulations. And I was listening to one of your podcasts, Kyle, where you talked about one of the reasons for psychedelics today being about one of the reasons for starting it was to kind of highlight some of the depth psychology lens. And one of my reasons for starting Beyond the Trip was to highlight the importance of psychotherapy. And so I thought I'm going to contact Kyle and see
Nice.
whether he would like to collaborate. And here we are.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, Joe and I really kind of wanted to highlight a lot of the breath work, transpersonal and depth-oriented work, because that's kind of been at the basis of our work. So I always love chatting and collaborating with other somatic, depth-oriented practitioners. I think it's important, and sometimes not always talked about, especially probably from the clinical perspective there that you're doing in the research. So maybe we could start off there. Like, what has been going on in Australia in regards to psychedelics?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting time to be working in psychedelics in Australia. I started working at the Clinical Psychedelic Lab. Gosh, it must be sort of 4 years ago now. I was working on a trial looking at psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for generalized anxiety disorder. It was one of the biggest ones and one of the sort of starting ones. There was one trial before this with Dr. Marg Ross and her team looking at psilocybin-assisted therapy for end-of-life care. But we were felt like the space was just really getting going in terms of the research. And then partway through, we found out that they were rescheduling these medicines. And there's a lot of myths around what's actually happening in Australia. So it's really good to kind of talk about it a little bit here. So what's happened is it's not decrim. So a lot of people think that to start with. So just to say that's definitely not what's happened. They've basically taken psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy and MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and they've rescheduled these medicines for use under the authorized prescriber scheme. So what that means is that if you're a psychiatrist, you can apply to a human research ethics board for an authorized prescriber license to prescribe these medicines alongside psychotherapy. So one of the great things about the model here is that they've really gone for this authorized prescriber model, but alongside the psychotherapy. So the protocols that are being rolled out are very similar to those in, say, the MAPS trials or in our trial, where there's like a dyad. We're doing the prep, dosing, integration. So these medicines are able to be used, but only under the authorized prescriber, like from a psychiatrist perspective, and a psychologist can be involved in the therapy. And a psychotherapist can be involved in the therapy. And the rules are different between each human research ethics board. So I can't get into too much of the weeds about that because it depends on who's. Yeah.
And is the psychiatrist prescribing and then being there, or are they prescribing, administer, and then leaving?
So that's a good question, Kyle. Like it depends. So they're clinically responsible. So very often they're a part of so it's done in a dyad model, like in the MAPS protocols. And so there's always two therapists, usually in the way that I've done it, both on the trials and in the clinical spaces that I'm aware of. And one of those might be the psychiatrist. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it might be two psychologists or a psychologist and a psychotherapist. Those rules are different in different areas, different states as well. In Australia, we don't have quite the same like difference between states as they do in the US,
Right.
but there are some differences as well. So I'm in Victoria, which is in Melbourne. I live in Melbourne, so
Awesome. And I
yeah.
think I remember this passed around February 2022 or 2021. I forget because I remember I was at a conference called Canadelic, and I remember hearing the news while I was there. What has the rollout been like? So it seems like it probably took a while to get going, and I'm not too sure if you can talk about like has that rollout been? Has there been any kind of like constrictions, roadblocks as it started to roll out?
Yeah, so it's been a slower rollout. So initially, when it was announced, I think it was around that time, we were kind of in the middle of the trial, and we had a meeting about it. And initially, it sounded like they were going to be doing it quite quickly. But in fact, what's happened because of the regulations around it, so people, it's actually treatment resistant depression and treatment resistant PTSD.
Hmm.
So people have to fit lots of different criteria, and they have to be assessed by the psychiatrist to see if they can fit those criteria to have these medicines. So yeah, I think it has been slower than anticipated, which I think is a good thing. Because in many ways Australia kind of, yeah, we beat the states in some ways, right? And
Yeah.
but actually it's something that requires potentially a real shift in how we see healing, a real shift in focus of how we treat people. And so I think it's good that it's been a slower rollout, because there's, psychedelic, as you well know, psychedelic therapy is about healing and working with whatever's underneath the symptoms, not symptom management. And it's a whole different process to what is usually the diagnostic medical model, where people are kind of, reducing symptoms and attached to particular diagnostic labels. And actually, I feel like these medicines and this work really invites us to go a lot deeper than that.
Hmm.
And so I feel like there's a real education piece in our community around that. And so I'm glad it was slower for that reason. And it's also one of the reasons I started the podcast.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think like we've all been really eager for psychedelics to like get legalized in whatever framework or decriminalized. But, as things start to roll out, you start seeing a lot of these like road bumps along the way. And I think taking our time with that can also be really important, right? Because these are really profound experiences for folks and thinking about like what guardrails are in place. What is the accessibility like
Mm,
because the medical model is expensive. I think that's why a lot of us here in the United States have also been like, let's look at some other models. And that's what we've seen roll out here in the
yeah.
States. So, what has it been like for accessibility for folks that are trying to get treatment? Like, how expensive is it? Does insurance cover it? Is it all out of pocket?
Yeah, it's one of the key things that we're all concerned about and working on is the cost. It is expensive at the moment. So currently, and this is, I mean, actually changing all the time. So just to say, at the moment, it's not covered by too many insurance companies, or some parts of the sessions may be covered by Medicare. So in Australia, we have something called Medicare, which is the like for me as a psychologist, for example, people can get a Medicare rebate. Government pays for part of this. Also, people come to see me, and they can get those reduced fees. So some of that system is possible to use with some of the therapy, but it's still really expensive. It can be $25,000, $30,000 for a course of
Wow.
treatment. It's really, because but we're really working really hard to bring insurance companies on board and the veteran affairs organizations as well. So there's a lot happening in that space, and it's changing all the time. We are really talking a lot about improving access, because that's prohibitive for so many people, and we're really concerned
Yeah.
about that in the space. It's the model that we're working with is the same model that's used in clinical trials. It's the one where the research evidence comes from, and so it's really important, I think, to stay true to that best practice. But also, how do we do this in a way that means that other people can afford it? I think what that will mean is the government coming on board more, and also some of the insurance companies. And there's a lot happening in that space. I'm not an expert on all of that. If you had my colleague Monica Schweikel from the psychedelic consultancy here, she would be able to speak to a lot of this in detail. But there's a lot of people working hard behind the scenes to improve access. Yeah.
That's good to hear. Do you feel that, like, I've heard like maybe drug policy in Australia is a little bit more conservative, but like do you see them moving towards like a decrim model or like a service center model that's outside the medical model there? Or do you feel like that might be like way down the line?
I don't know. Australia surprises me. I'm originally from the UK. I've been here maybe 12 years, I think. There's lots of people that would love to see that happen, or at least to see the restrictions shifted into a way that means it's more affordable. It's so hard to say. Generally, Australia is more, I think, conservative in their drug policy. So it feels like that might not be on the cards. It's not, tell me about America. Like, what's happening in the US? I know it's different state to state, and you probably have different reflections, but how is it all going over there?
Yeah, it really started with Denver decriminalizing psilocybin just in the city limits there back in 2019. And then Oregon followed after that and legalized psilocybin within a healing service center model. So that was outside of like the scope of this more medical model, and people without a diagnosis could then go receive services. And then we've seen these smaller city ordinances pass through the decriminalized nature movement. So we have a number of towns and cities throughout the U.S. that have passed these local resolutions to decriminalize it. So it takes away possible criminal charges for possession, gifting, etc. Theoretically, right? Like it could, state could always come in, feds could always come in, since these are just like local resolutions. It just means like, it should be the lowest priority for police enforcement. And then we had Prop 122 pass here in Colorado, which legalized psilocybin or legalized natural medicine. Well, hold on. There's two bills there. Decriminalize natural medicines. So it allowed folks to grow, gift, consume natural medicines, mushrooms, cacti, mescaline containing cacti that isn't peyote, DMT, etc. Ibogaine isn't on that decrim list in a way. There's some kind of restrictions around it. And then they had the legal framework there as well, where people can go to a service center, and that they're mainly focusing on psilocybin in the healing centers. And it sounds like they're going to be expanding into ibogaine treatment as well. There was just a conference that happened over in Aspen a few weeks ago. Joe just did a podcast, wrote an article about some of the recap that happened there, but it is a discussion around, can they get ibogaine treatments up and running after they really get like the psilocybin structure in place. And then we're seeing other states too, like New Mexico just passed a legalization bill that's more kind of like in a medical model. New Jersey just is trying to advance a bill around. So it sounded like there's a little bit of confusion on the internet around what bill actually was advanced. It's not completely passed. It still has to, go through a few more steps, but New Jersey's trying to create like a pilot program to see how this could get rolled out. And I think they would incorporate that. They're allocating like $6 million. And I think it's just towards like getting it started in hospitals first. And so we're seeing policy across the board, from decrim to the medical models that are rolling out here. And we'll see on the federal level, that is something that just still lags behind, is federal rescheduling and stuff like that. I did see an article recently that the DEA has been trying to like up production around psychedelics for clinical trials, because they would typically like restrict how much could get produced in a year for that. So it sounds like, more clinical trials, more research is on the way, but you never know. It's always up and down. we could see like an example with
Mm.
Oregon for when they passed their decriminalize bill. I always confuse measure 109, measure 110. I think it's, yeah, I
It's
always forget which
complicated,
one's
eh?
which. But
Yeah.
they passed a decriminalization bill with the legalization bill, and they've rolled back on that. So in that bill, it actually decriminalized like a lot of different substances, not just psychedelics. And since
Mm.
mushrooms and psychedelics were also wrapped up in that, when they reversed it, it actually recriminalized psychedelics outside of, say, the service center model. So yeah, there's been a lot of stuff happening, and it just seems to be kind of like, compounding, which is exciting. That, I never thought it would be happening
Mm.
this quick when I first started getting more involved in psychedelics. So it's cool to see policy does change over time.
Yeah, awesome. Is my Wi-Fi okay, Kyle? I can just change to something else.
Yeah, maybe it looks like it's a little
Is that right?
fragmented. Yeah, so maybe if you do want to
Just give
switch over to something else. Yeah.
I'll try, yeah. Yeah, the joys of the Australian internet. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, yeah, cool. All right, so everybody that is tuning in, we'll just do a little pause here while we get the Wi-Fi figured out. There's also been some, I guess, intense solar storms that have been rolling through. I think there's a big solar flare that happened on Tuesday or Monday, and so they've been kind of predicting there might be some like weirdness with Wi-Fi and electronics.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's mine can be up and down. So I'm back now, I think. Is that all
Oh, you
good?
are. Yep.
Awesome. Yes, wow. I mean, I still find it fascinating how different the federal and state legislations are in the US, and how it must be quite complex. My colleagues and friends Bruce and Marcelo from MAPS,
Mm.
they've been sort of trying to get their center off the ground, and it just, it feels like there's just a lot of complexity for all of us, but also really exciting. I agree. I never thought that we would be where we are in Australia. I just had no. It was a surprise to a lot of us.
I think so,
In
because I
some ways,
remember the
yeah,
policy was trying to move forward with mind medicine in Australia, and then it seemed to get blocked. And then I remember just all of a sudden it was like the news broke, and you're like, what just happened there? Like,
yeah, and
yeah.
and I think one of the things that in terms of the work here that I would really like to see and advocate for is looking at, because at the moment the access for people with treatment resistant depression with psilocybin assisted psychotherapy, and people with PTSD who've tried some other treatments for MDMA assisted psychotherapy. But I would really like to see end of life care really
Mhm.
looked at.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people advocating for that. I've got a podcast series coming up next year about that, because there's actually a lot of research for that population too. And I think almost all of us will unfortunately know someone in our lives who is touched by cancer, and probably who has passed away from cancer if you look at the
Yeah.
rates. So I really would like to see that use expanded in those populations.
Same, and just being able to have access to it. I
Mm.
always remember something, one of our past guests, Dr. McLean from she'd be at Hopkins working on these. It was like we don't know when we're gonna die, right? And there's this idea that like if we have these transitory tools that help us to confront death and life,
Mm.
like shouldn't
Mm.
we just naturally have access to some of this stuff so we can confront that? And I always come back to a quote that I learned during a course I took on death and dying. It's,
Mm.
how we live our life is how we prepare for death, and how we prepare for death is how we live our life. And so,
Mm.
like, if we're able to like confront that, does that shift the way that we approach stuff? Right. And if somebody
Mm.
is confronted and is diagnosed with terminal illness, like, should they have a human right to be able to like ease some of that suffering and anxiety? And you kind of see a bit of the hiccups up in Canada where they have the special access program, and sometimes I hear that people have a hard time actually getting access and approval for that, even though they do have terminal illness. And so yeah,
Mm.
I agree. I wish that that would also expand as well.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like it's something that I work with so much in my private practice. I've got a private practice. I do psychotherapy individually with people, and um, one of the things that is such a common thing is fear of death. So the kind of the existential fear
Mm.
of death, not the kind of, even if someone is not sick, but they maybe they when you get underneath the anxiety or whatever is presenting, it's that. And so often it's about a lot of things, but one of the things it can be about is a life not lived in the way that they want to be living it. You know, do you know the book Staring at the Sun by Irving Yalom?
I don't think so. No.
Oh, it's a beautiful book about death anxiety and his own death
Mm.
anxiety. And um, yeah, it's really great. And it talks a lot about these different ways in which you can support people with that. And kind of, he's very like self disclosing in that book. He's an amazing uh, God, he must be getting quite a lot older now, but existential psychotherapist who's written
Mm.
a whole bunch of books that I love. Yeah.
Nice. And how did he approach that topic of like, did he have his own experiences with death or like psychedelics or?
Death, fear of
Yeah.
death. Yeah, I think he lived with this kind of death anxiety that his whole
Mm.
life, that he realized was affecting how he was in the world. And so he started to reflect on what would be important for him. And he talked about, like, I guess he's very self-disclosing about writing books, as kind of putting some of himself in the world so that he can
Yeah.
continue to ripple out. And I guess we all ripple out in through the people that we love, the way that we are in the world and the people that we care for. um, we leave a little piece of ourselves with them, don't we? So,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah,
And like, I mean, something like that just reminds me of like, when you are on your deathbed, like, are you going to regret not doing things? Right. And so it goes back to that thing. It's like how we prepare for death is how we live our lives. Right. And
yeah,
it's like, if we're not thinking about that, are we really consciously showing up for the life that we really want to live? Um,
yes, yes. This is a great topic. I could keep going on this. Um, I feel like the reason that I ended up making this huge life change to move to Australia is partly to do with my first job as a psychologist, which was in bereavement counselling.
mm,
And I think there's something about being that close to people who have recently had someone in their lives die that makes you really think about those big questions.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard not to, I
Yeah.
think it puts it right in your face and you go, hmm. I think the
Yeah.
hard part is like actually integrating it, right? It's like we can have a lot of those insights and then, we're back to the 3D, back in the grind. And, I think that's
Mm,
the tension point for a lot of folks. How
totally.
how did you get involved in the psychedelic work?
Great question. So I was working as a psychologist in refugee mental health, actually, for quite a lot of years, in torture and trauma counselling.
Mm,
And so I could say a lot about that, but one of the, I guess, the pathway to here was that I think you have to live slightly under a rock to not know about, to be working that much with PTSD and not hear about MAPS and what they were doing. And so I learned about what MAPS was doing and MDMA assisted psychotherapy and having really good impacts with PTSD. And so that was kind of my doorway into this work. And then during COVID, I decided, we had a really long lockdown here, and I got in touch with an old friend who I saw was doing that work. So she was on what ended up not have the trial ended up being delayed, but she was starting to work on the MDMA assisted psychotherapy trial at Monash Uni with the first responders. And I said, "Oh, I'm really interested in that work." And she said, "Why don't you come and work with us? I think you've got the right background being a somatic psychotherapist
mm,
who's also really interested in depth psychology. Would you like to come on over?" And so that's where I began. And it's been an amazing adventure working at the clinical psychedelic lab with a great team of really like-minded um, therapists. And Dr. Paul Lignitsky, who heads up the lab, is a really great person to work alongside, and it's been lots of cool projects happening there.
yeah, yeah. Oh, amazing. What's your journey been like with like training and providing psychedelic therapy? Like, as a traditional therapist, a somatic therapist, like what did you have to learn? What did you have to unlearn to start really working with these medicines?
Yeah. I was just thinking about this yesterday in preparing a bit for this call, and I've actually been teaching on the psychedelic education program at Monash as well. So this has been like a real live question for me.
Mm,
Um, what do I want to sort of teach other people? What did I need to learn? And I feel like um, when I was been working with, say, I worked for about 2 years on the psilocybin assisted psychotherapy trial. So we were working with people with generalized anxiety disorder in a dyad therapy model. Um, and so I think one of the things that I found really important is if I think about dose days in particular and somatic approaches, learning how to really track someone's body,
mm,
really support them to have things that kind of move through, but also learning how to get out of the way as well
right.
and
Yeah.
just let happen what is happening in the space. And that kind of balance of like actually when someone is in a dose day, most of the time myself and my co-therapist are really just kind of holding the space, being alongside, really supporting them. But sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're doing stuff. um, and I was thinking the other day, I you know, um, was supporting somebody to move a somatic process through their body, but I was kind of doing it even the other recently, from a place of something that I thought should happen,
Mm,
and actually when I reflected with my co-therapist, I think it was a bit confusing and a bit too much for them. Like I was getting them to do a push, which can be really helpful. It is really helpful. I knew this person really well. I've worked with them for many, many sessions. Um, but in that moment on the dose day, it was me thinking, trying to be a good somatic therapist. And actually, what I find so much better is just really amplifying what's going on already and not bringing something in, which sounds like you're not doing a lot, but you're actually doing a lot when you are
mm.
learning how to amplify and track someone's body.
And how do you get out of your own way in those
It's a great question.
situations? Yeah.
That's a great question. I think you know meditation practice and grounding and coming into my own body has been really helpful in general, as I've been practicing meditation for a long time and yoga, and those practices like really helped me to get in my own body. And so then I'm just kind of in my body watching the other person move through whatever they are moving through. And I think how you get out of your own way is also, it's a great having a co-therapist. If I'm
Mm,
thinking I might go
yeah.
check in, I might do a thing now. What are you feeling? And I think it's really important to have really good supervision. So if you really know yourself and you know what's yours, then you're also more likely to get out of your own way.
Yeah.
Sounds so straight, it's a complex thing though, right? What about
Yeah.
you? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I love that you
yeah.
bring up, like, the team aspect. I mean, that's definitely been a lot of my work too, like, hosting groups, whether it's breathwork groups or we were doing, international retreats, just having other people to check in with. And, for me, it is a lot of, like, just body awareness and thinking like,
Yeah.
okay, what's coming up? Is this me? Is this actually, for the client, for the participant? If I feel like it's a little bit for me, I have to like really dig in and like
Mm,
think about that. And so I always try to use that weight acronym, like why am I talking, why am I treating, etc.
mm,
And yeah, like a good example of this is we had somebody at a retreat or a workshop one time. They were just very vocal.
mm,
And there's a part of me that was like, I need to tell this person to stop because it's like disturbing everybody else.
mm,
And so I'm like, bringing it in. I checked in with the other facilitator and, I was like, what should we do here? And I think they even said, well, why are you feeling like anxious or why do you feel like you need to stop this? And I'm like, at the root of it, I feel like I'm being a bad facilitator, because I'm worried
mm,
about everybody else. Like, is
mhm,
everybody else like being disrupted by this? And we made the decision not to intervene and let that person's process like ride. But it is really hard because I think also as like therapists and helpers and whatnot, we want to feel like we're productive. And I think feeling productive is like either talking or trying to do something and, like, just pulling
yeah,
back and, like, as you mentioned, like, actually, it's really helpful. You're actually doing a lot by not intervening or doing anything at those times. But it's
Mm,
hard. I think that's like the hardest thing to try to like unlearn as like a helper. It's like really allowing people to trust their own process, and that,
yeah.
that they'll and to create that space for them to do that exploration, have agency over it a bit more. But it's tough.
Yeah, totally. And I'm trained in sensory motor psychotherapy with the Pat Ogden School.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was reflecting on in my training, that one of the 10 of the basic kind of principles is that sometimes when the nervous system is dysregulated, it's because there's a stuck defensive response within the body that needs to come through. And when we did our training, that was kind of, we were taught, this sort of main ones that people might think of, like a push or a kick or
Right.
and you're not doing those fast. When you move a stuck defense response through the body to help with the nervous system reset, it's very slow and mindful and pressurized. But what I was thinking about when I think about my psychedelic work in dosing is that it's really taught me that people's bodies and the movements that need to happen are so much more idiosyncratic than that.
Mm,
And actually, like, if I think about that case I mentioned where I was trying to help that person, and that movement was useful for them previously and after, but it wasn't the right moment then.
right.
They needed to do something else, and it might be just a shaking or a pushing in a different way. Could be anything really. And I think that's been a big learning for me too. Kind of just really, I never know what's going to happen on a dose day. I might think I do. I might have worked with someone a lot of times, but you never know.
You have to be prepared for uncertainty and the unknown in this work, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Where do you think the overlap is between like psychedelic work and somatic work? I know somatics has been very popular recently, and there's a lot
Mhm.
more talk about like nervous system regulation and learning how to like work with the body. Do you find that it is a powerful adjunct to psychedelic therapy, or as you're saying too, like maybe I need to pull back and actually not do this thing right now, right?
Yeah, I find it really, really helpful for what I was just talking about in terms of learning how to track. I
Mm,
feel like it taught me how to track a body and the posture. And even from the first preparation session, if I think about my work on the uh, generalized anxiety disorder trial, where people that we're working with, their nervous systems were really, really, really heightened, and I think even from the first session, I'm checking out, like, okay, how are they holding their body? How do they relate to their body? Like, where are they? I noticed that they're sitting really tense in a particular part of the body. I might get curious about that, um, because I guess one of the ways that I understand anxiety, sometimes it's different for everyone, but is like a kind of disconnection with the body, even though the body is talking.
mm,
Emotionality in the body can, you can have a lot of anxiety, and then underneath that is grief or anger, or
right.
you know,
Yeah.
and so I find it helpful in that way to help people to kind of navigate that space, to get to know their body before going into a dosing, because on dose days people will get taken there. I feel like, I guess if I think about how I've seen these medicines work, it is, we spend so much time in our head in the modern world, and somatics has got really popular in the last 10 years, but we still, all of us, most of us, spend too much time in our heads. And so but so much of the way that we experience the world is nonverbal. And so, of
Yeah.
course, these medicines will take us into that place in our body so often. So I think it's helpful for people to have um, an orientation almost into some of the things that might happen.
Yeah, and I always think, and I kind of say, it's almost like we're very somatically illiterate as a culture.
Mm,
And I just think about like what comes up in psychedelics. Like people might feel different sensations, emotions, and not know what to do with it.
yeah.
And I think at least like helping people to have practices or develop a language on like, oh, like this anxiety I'm feeling isn't necessarily bad, right? Like maybe there's actually content to work there with, and how do I work with that instead of just continuing to try to suppress it. But it takes a while, I think, for people to like learn that and be curious about it.
Totally, 100. I completely agree. I love that, somatically illiterate. I think we are, like, yet also so much of the time when people are suffering, it's because their body is feeling so much intensity. The people I worked with in the anxiety disorder trial, that was definitely true for. And I think it's also helpful, if I think about, I was lucky enough to be a part of before we did the psychedelic trial with psilocybin at Monash, we did another kind of trial where we had our own self-experience.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, the therapists sat for each other in dyads, and so we did like a mini version. This sort of psilocybin trial was about 3 months of therapy and dosing, but we did a mini version where I had like one preparation session with 2 therapists, one of which was my dyad partner for the trial, and then a dose day, and then an integration session, and which was really the best training that I could have ever had, and I wish was available more freely to psychologists and psychiatrists and people working in the space in Australia now, because I feel like that's one of the things that I feel most concerned about, is that there's not really a legal pathway for people to do that.
I was just going to ask, for folks that are starting to get involved, are they able to have their own experience or no?
Not legally at the moment, unless it's part of a trial, which people are doing and trying, and also I think it's really important to research these things, like to research the effectiveness of that, like how useful it was. And there was a lot of really good evidence that we got out of that trial. And so people are doing that, but there's not, that's the complication, it's really, they've taken psilocybin and MDMA down from being at the same level of restriction as arsenic, which is kind of wild, down a level, but only one, So that makes it difficult.
That's interesting. They would build a pathway for like clinical research, but not like actual practice, as it's become like legal for other folks. Yeah,
I think if anything, I think it will start to happen, hopefully. I mean, I don't know, but there's a lot of people kind of advocating for that too.
Yeah.
And we were able to do it through a trial, which is great. And I had a lot of things happened on my dose day, but one of the things was a really intense stomach pain that came up kind of partway through. And, I was supported with that and given, a pillow to hold. And then it continued to unfold in the evening. I went home, I was picked up by a wonderful support person, and I went home and I continued to work with it, outside of the session, and sat in a bath and just kind of did some breathing. And I have those practices, I know how to do that. It didn't surprise me. And so if I think about how I want to prepare people for this work, it is about that the somatic processing can also continue after the session. It's helpful to have. I'm curious about how you work with breath work, actually, and how you support people with that. But because I think it could be really helpful as well.
Yeah, I think well, I guess before I get into the breath work,
Yes.
like that stomach thing, did you see that as something psychosomatic or byproduct of like the psilocybin that you're taking? Like, because we talk about like nausea does come up and there might be some stomach stuff, but like, do you see it as more physiological, or that was more kind of psychosomatic and there's like emotions there that you had to continue to work with?
Definitely emotional. I hold so much in my belly, and I've had, experiences with IBS my whole life and like stuff like that. So there is, it felt very emotional. And in the session, I came out and said to my lovely therapist, I've got this really bad stomach pain, and I don't want to go there. And they were like, is that something that you need to go towards? Maybe do you need some support? Would you like a pillow? We can come and hold your hand. They were, and they encouraged me to go back. I did change my body position, which I also think can be really helpful. If I think about like being able to, I sat up and not lying down anymore. I also really always like to have a yoga mat on the floor for people and me as the facilitator. But I kind of went, and so I sat down, closed my eyes, and I went in, and I had some really big insights come through in that process. And so that continued to come through later outside of that. So kind of almost like sort of really a lot of download of information and processing of emotion. So yeah, it definitely felt psychosomatic to me.
Yeah. I always feel like I need to like move that energy when it's coming up. Like I feel like when I'm just like stuck and like rigid, it just gets like more intense. So to be able to like
Totally.
move and breathe into it, I think can be really important. But
Mm.
yeah, I think for me, like using breath beforehand can be really impactful because I think sometimes when we're in those really deep experiences, people sometimes forget to breathe in a way, you know?
Mm.
And when something really difficult's coming up, which is just like, practice before going in. Like, what does it feel like to like sit with those emotions? And so sometimes before doing ketamine therapy with clients, I would actually just do some short breath work sessions
Mm.
so we could like just see what it's like to like induce a non-ordinary state without a substance first, learn how to like navigate big emotions when they come up in that state, and then just to help do a little bit of that preparation. And then I think during the session, just returning to the breath when things get really gnarly, and people
Mm.
feel like what's going on. And I know for me, like in my personal experiences, like if I didn't have all that like breath work stuff, it would have been really challenging. I just think about like my experiences before breath work and then like after doing more breath work, and how those breath work practices help to deepen the intensity in a
Mm.
different way for some sort of like resolution, instead of trying to like push it away and be like, oh, I don't want to feel this, right? This is too much. It's like it allows me to like be with the experience, even though it can be really intense. And
Mm.
then on the other side, being able to like use it as like an integration tool. um,
Yeah.
yeah. Allowing people to like do some circular breathing to get back into that state. Maybe it helps with like a little bit of resolution. But I think like after psychedelics, I think timing's interesting. I remember we did a session, a breathwork thing, like at a retreat. And the folks that had the session the day before felt like it was too activating. But the people
Mm.
that dosed 2 days prior said it actually felt like it helped to resolve a lot of things that like were left unresolved. So it helped to like bring some of that back to the surface, for more processing. Um,
That's really interesting. Yeah, I can imagine that, like, that would be really helpful. I in that integration space, like I remember I did a holotropic breathwork workshop with some colleagues, and I guess that is when we were training for I think this was later. I think it was for the MDMA assisted psychotherapy trial, not the psilocybin one. But like I'm writing a clinical intervention at the moment for a new trial that's in development, which is looking at psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and partnering with men's behavior change for men who perpetrate violence. And so it's a pretty complex area, and we're still developing it at the moment, but really thinking about this question of how to support the therapists
mm,
into learning how to do this work. And I was thinking about breathwork as a legal option,
yeah,
and holotropic breathwork. You can go so deep. I remember I listened to you talk about this, and you were saying that you were a little bit skeptical the very first time
I
that
was
you
very
did any breathwork.
skeptical. Yeah.
I was so skeptical,
Yeah.
and I was blown away by the experience, and I was so surprised. I thought, oh, how is this going to do anything? And then the next thing you know, I was in a very deep process, being supported. We kind of set it up so it was a similar sort of support structure to what would happen in a psychedelic session, which was really helpful in learning
Yeah.
how to do this work. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember I was chatting with Rick Doblin about this and seeing like, because a lot of folks do use breath work as a training modality, as like a,
Mm.
legal way. And he said, I think it's really great for like psilocybin therapy because you're very hands off. But with like
Mm.
MDMA therapy, since it's a little bit more like, a little bit more talking, it might not actually like be maybe the best thing. But I think it does help to teach you to like be with yourself. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to that training. It's like, how do we just be with ourselves when there's big catharsis going on without always
Mm,
needing to like intervene right away? And I think that comes back to like getting out of our own way, right? It's like, oh, I'm feeling triggered right now because somebody's having like this big thing unfold, and how do I stick with my breath? How do I stick with my body and just like not need to do that and intervene? But
yes, right. I'm smiling because I was teaching about this on recently, and you know, I think it just takes a lot of practice, and it's great if you have two of you because sometimes you know, as a therapist, we're going to be something's going to come up for us, and someone's having a big release or being you know loud or distressed or in you know panicking, right, which is
mhm,
kind of one of the harder things, I think, if someone starts to panic and you
yeah,
know gets really distressed that way. And it's so contagious, that nervous system
yeah,
activation. And so learning how to just really ground and knowing when you need to take a moment, and your co-therapist can have a go. For those of us that are fortunate enough to work that way, I know it's not always the
yeah.
case, but it's really important.
It's interesting, yeah, how like somebody else's experience can really impact us. And you're saying panic, and when you mentioned that, I remember an experience where somebody was like dealing with a lot of panic and anxiety, and they needed to go outside, and I could feel that. Like, even though
Mm,
I felt like I was like grounded, like as soon as we
mm.
like left that container, I could feel the panic and anxiety like way more. Where I'm like, ooh, like maybe we should go back inside where it feels safer. But yeah, those mirror neurons, right? And like we're co-regulating with each other in a
Yeah,
way. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, even just thinking about the case that there's been a few people where in a generalized anxiety disorder, understandably, people might meet something, and maybe this is flowing us into that shadow work conversation. They might meet a part of themselves that's really scary, and they're really afraid, and they kind of want to, they want, you know, whip the eye shades, the headphones off, and they want to run away. And I so understand that, you know, and I remember really, I think that's when you can get pulled, or I can get pulled into trying to do too much as well
Mm,
sometimes. Be like,
yeah.
talk too much, kind of, and actually, you know, what a person needs when they're like that is really less words, calm,
Yeah.
space. Um, but it happens quickly, right? Like I can even feel a bit of a memory of that in my body as I'm talking, you know, that like, oh no, what do I do? So, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, exactly. You mentioned like rip the headphones off and like the eye shades off.
Mm,
I think that's something I've had to like also unlearn in a bit. Like when I was
mm,
doing a lot more ketamine therapy with folks, I noticed those with like pretty significant trauma had a really hard time actually like wanting to put headphones and eye shades on. And that kind of challenged me in a way because it's like, this is the framework which we come from. And I had to be like, actually, what would it look like if we took more of this like trauma informed relational approach and say, yeah, maybe we don't need to do that right away. We
mm,
maybe we can get there, and we can take like
yeah,
small steps to that so you can feel
yeah.
safe instead of saying like you need to do it this way. And that was like a big challenge for me to like unlearn, be like, oh, okay, even though like I've been taught this framework, this is like how we do everything. Maybe it's okay for somebody not to wear headphones and eye shades right off the bat, with some of this
Totally.
stuff. Like, how do we? I always say it's like, how do we get in the water and swim together, so we feel
Mm.
safe enough, to go into the deep end together.
Yeah, that's a beautiful metaphor. And I think how do we, yeah, how do we do this together? Because we often say, or I often say, like, we're with you. Like, wherever you're going, we're here. We've got this, we've got you, we've got the, we'll look after your physical body as well and make sure that everything is safe on the couch. And yeah, I think it is really important to go with what feels okay for the person in the space, you know. And I've certainly had people who just want to close their eyes, and
Yeah,
people who want to sit up, people who want to get up and move, you know. And I think there's a bit of an implicit message in the protocol sometimes that we should all lie down on the couch and not move. And I'm a super kinetic person. I'm standing up right now.
me
I
too.
kind
Yeah,
of yeah, yeah. And I have to have like a yoga mat for myself, but also I feel like it encourages other people to get down onto the mat too and move their body, which is really important, I think.
yeah. You were bringing up the shadow, and
Yes.
how do you define shadow work? What is shadow work to you?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's I was just reflecting on this, and I really liked I know you did a course not so long ago with the integration circle, and it was that actually the shadow can have this idea that it's something really hard, right? Like it's something really dark and like inherently negative, but it's so often, in my experience as a therapist, it's actually something that the person might shut off as any part of themselves that they kind of put into their unconscious because they deem it somehow unacceptable. And that might be wanting to be an artist, as you said on that course, or when the family really wants you to be in a corporate job. And I think, it really got me thinking about the people I've worked with, and so often at the core of whatever kind of therapy we're doing, whether it's psychedelic work or other kind of work, is that there's a part of themselves that they really want to bring into the world, but they feel they can't.
Yeah.
And the tension of that builds and builds and gets called depression or anxiety, or, and so very often we kind of want to take someone down to meet those parts within themselves and to bring that out into the open, It's
Yeah.
not to say that the shadows not or can it can also obviously be parts of us holding pain. I'm an IFS therapist as well as the other types of therapy, and I kind of that the idea of that we exile these child parts of ourselves that are holding pain is also something that feels important to me.
Yeah, and like, what are those like golden parts that want to come out? I remember somebody saying like, shouldn't therapy or psychedelic experiences like always be hard? Like, am I not doing the work if I'm not like going into like the pain and grief?
Mm.
And I tried to challenge that, like, kind of thinking about this golden shadow aspect, knowing that like maybe your nervous system actually needs to rest, and what
Yes.
does that and you could automatically like just see, I don't want to do that, right? It's like, actually, maybe that's where the work is. Like, how do we actually find rest in the nervous system instead of always chewing up the darkness? And that can be really hard, right? Because I think when we think about the quote unquote work, we think about those darker aspects. I need to get to the bottom of this wound. But as you're saying too, like, what about those like exiled parts that really want to shine, that
Yeah.
really want to like be expressed, that want to be the artist, that wants to like, start a podcast or create a Substack or like, put their voice out there. But that other part saying, don't do that. You're not worthy of it. And so then you have this interplay between that shadow, that more darker part, but then this other part that really just wants to come out and say, hey, this is who I am. And I think that's the integration. I think that's really where kind of like the work is. It's like, how do we bridge that gap there? Because yeah, it just might get exiled again, and if we're
Mm.
using that like parts work language.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember a dosing session on the psilocybin trial, and one of the participants just started singing. Beautiful, beautiful voice. And my co-therapist and I were so deeply moved, that she was just that they were doing that they were singing, and we were
Mhm.
like, wow. Yeah, and it was like that creative expression was just coming through, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, I actually am someone who's pretty terrified of public speaking, as historically, right? And
Yeah.
like, and so for me, doing a podcast was a huge push. Like it was there's the professional reasons, but also a personal journey of like, I have stuff I want to say about this field at this
Yeah.
moment, and I'm going to do it.
What made you kind of get over that, or like how have you been working with that edge to step into that a little bit more?
I guess I think it's feeling the tension and being kind to those parts. I feel really well supported by my wonderful colleagues who even today I've live stream is a scary thing, right? Like for me anyway. And my colleagues just really supporting me and my friends, but also like noticing those parts and going, oh,
Mm.
okay, it's all right, it's okay, we've got this, we can
Yeah.
we can do it, you know. And I have a beautiful therapist who I've worked with for many years, I think it's really important as a therapist to have your own therapy. I go in and out of that. And the reason that I use IFS a lot in my practice is because I've benefited so much from it myself. And so I really find that working with those parts within me helpful and noticing them somatically.
Yeah.
And grounding. I've got no shoes on. I find like standing and having my feet on the ground, squishing my toes is really
Yep.
helpful for this kind of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
And do you ever, like, I'm noticing like you're holding your hand there. Like, do you notice like a knot or anything that ever comes up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's here. It's like a little knot here.
Mm.
Used to be here actually, but I don't get that as much now.
Mm.
But it's often here, and so I just kind of hold that place and breathe into it a little bit. Sometimes reminders from my community to take care of those parts of myself before I do things like this, but I
Yeah.
do that myself too.
Well, thank you for showing up and, doing the work and letting that like golden shadow shine. It's tough. I think
Yeah.
I've probably talked about it here and there, but I have like the same type of like, wound in the way around like that throat chakra. And this has been a really tough journey over the years of like, I remember sometimes we would put episodes out when we first started, and I'm like, I don't want to put that out to the world. And Joe's like, we got to put it out. And I'm like, can we edit it a little bit more? Can we like delete it? Can we like redo it? And all of a sudden the episode goes out and you're like cringing a bit. And you're like, but then like, somebody might like reach out and go, that was an awesome episode. And I always come
Yeah.
back to, it's like, we're our own worst critic.
Yeah.
And like, how do we like get out of our own way at that times? But still doesn't make it easy. Really doesn't make it easy. It's definitely one of these challenges that
I didn't know that about you, Kyle. I'm really glad that you got out of your own way and put this all out there. 300 and something episodes in now, right?
like 800, I think.
800.
Well,
Oh my
between me and Joe.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
So, and do you still ever get like that, or are you kind of, it's not so
Oh,
much
totally.
of it? You do, yeah,
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 yeah. And public
yeah,
speaking. I hate public speaking, ironically. It's funny I can do this stuff, or like teach. But like sometimes I remember I did a conference like in person, the entire ride down, I was like having a panic attack. It's like,
yeah,
and I could notice it was like all in the throat. I'm like, I constantly clear my throat. I always feel like there's something in there. But yeah, it's like this old kind of like shadow wound
yeah.
that has showed up for me transpersonally in psychedelic and breathwork experiences. I know astrology is a little kind of controversial still at times in certain circles, but it's also represented in there as well, like where my
Mm,
Chiron placement is and stuff like that. And then I could look at like, my biographical history and like the amount of times where it felt like my voice was suppressed. I'm also like,
mm,
I don't have a formal diagnosis, but like definitely dyslexic at times.
mm,
So like I'll screw words up. Like when I grew up in like reading out loud was like the most terrifying thing. And I would have so much anxiety in school. And like I would always screw words up and like, my classmates would always laugh at me and stuff like that. And I still, I find myself like screwing words up or like, I mix things up or can't say a word. But I think I've learned to just find humor in it. It's like, my imperfections, and we're all human, and we all have our imperfections, and that's okay. So
totally. Yeah, 100%. I think it's one of the most common fears, public speaking. I was talking to a
yeah.
friend who's doing a course about it recently, about the same thing. I remember I did a talk once at the Australian Childhood Trauma Conference when I was in my refugee work days, and I was meant to be in like a small kind of workshop space, which is I was kind of doing something in the small room, and because of some scheduling, they bumped me to the main room with the podium and everything, with like 20 minutes notice,
Oh,
which is
jeez.
kind of good because I didn't really have time to run away, which is exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
It's terrifying, and like it was, I really had to. I almost didn't do it, but I pushed through that anxiety a little bit, and it was okay, and people are so, yeah, people I think I had a really beautiful piece of feedback about the podcast recently that someone said that there was an episode I did with Bruce and Marcela that they had shared
Mm.
with a client who had found it really helpful for helping them to prepare. And so for me, I was like, yeah, that's great. That's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to put it out there.
And that stuff's priceless, like that type of feedback to like hear, be like, oh wow, like, it's actually like having an impact in a way. And I think that's like what keeps me showing up at times. But for all of you listening, hopefully it's motivation to, step into some work that maybe you're scared of or hesitant. It's like that is that shadow work, right? Like just being able
Mm,
to address some of that, and the integration is like showing up to do it, which but it's also terrifying. You're like, ugh, freeze
yeah,
up. And
totally,
yeah. Do you have a
totally.
formal like back? I was gonna say, do you have like a formal background in any sort of like Jungian psychology or?
I've done. I'm not a Jungian therapist, but I've done some training in process work, and I feel
Oh, cool.
like I am someone who I think it's kind of always been the underlying kind of principles of how I work. So when I worked in the refugee mental health space, I did a lot of sand tray work,
Oh,
which I don't
cool.
know if people will be familiar with that. So I was working with young people and kids actually and families then. So that's where you kind of have a sand tray of a particular type and figurines, and then you create a space that feels safe, and the person will create worlds and just freely uh, uh, with the different things that they put in the tray. And I was astounded by how amazingly people were able to communicate with me about things that they wouldn't have been able to, even though we were working with interpreters a lot. So yeah,
Yeah.
so I think the core idea that the psyche, given the right conditions, will move towards healing and individuation is something that has underlined so much of what I do. But I'm not trained. I would not like to call myself a Jungian analyst or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. And do you see like well, I guess something else popped in my head, sorry, kind of going off.
Sorry.
Process work, is that like Mendel's process work or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
So
cool.
yeah, and I think that's been something, some colleagues of mine are really deep in that space at the clinical
Cool.
psychedelic lab at Monash. Um, and I definitely have been really influenced by that, but also have done a lot of reading and my own work with that model as well.
Yeah, I love
Find it.
Mendel's work. It's pretty interesting. Um,
Yeah.
and do you see like kind of like this like archetypal process, Jungian shadow work, like really important for psychedelics or like the integration process?
I think it just seems to naturally take people into those places of depth within the psyche, right? That's kind of how one way. I mean, there's many ways to understand how psychedelics work, of course, but it feels to me that people often go into those places, and so I think it is helpful. I'm always really careful not to impose any particular frame on somebody, but I think having that knowledge around archetypes and the collective unconscious, and different energies and archetypes that might emerge is really helpful as a therapist to kind of help guide the person, but also to help guide myself in understanding it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Kyle?
I've found it to be, yeah, really important for like trying to understand all the weirdness that comes up in psychedelics, like when there's a lot of like symbology, symbols, kind of archetypes to arise. It's like, what's my relationship to that? And as you're saying, it's like not to necessarily like put a framework on it for somebody, but I guess my take is like, how do we get more curious about that stuff that's arising? And like,
Mm,
here's like kind of a map that we can use as a way to like understand, like, yeah, how have other people kind of explored this stuff in the past? Like, I'm really interested in dream work.
mm.
And there's just so much interesting stuff that comes through dreams, and I feel like dreams are inherently psychedelic in a way.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can we use that to also, do integration work, continue the ongoing process there? And the the mind and the psyche are so vast and so depth. There's so much depth there, and it's like, what does it all mean? And I think that's like where the analytical mind comes in. It's like, oh, what does this all mean? I could just sit here and like think about it all day. But I think it helps to just provide a little bit of context, to like, maybe how do we make sense of these things that are arising in the psyche. I always think about something a teacher told me is like, being lost at sea without a map is terrifying. And I
Yeah,
think it is important for us to have some sort of map of the psyche. How whatever that
100%.
is for people, maybe it's like more religious, maybe it's more depth oriented psychology approaches, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But I think developing some sort of map can be a grounding rod for folks. Otherwise, you're just like
Definitely.
untethered.
100%. I really, and I completely agree. And I think it's so, it it's taking me back to my very many years ago. I did my doctorate research was actually about how people understand their experience of what was termed in the literature like paranoia and paranoid delusions. And in that research, it was really interesting to notice how people made sense of things in different ways, and how important it was to be curious and to ask, and I bring that curiosity to the psychedelic space. But sometimes people really are like, is that a literal thing or not,
Right.
or like, and I think that's where some of the speaking able to speak from a Jungian frame can be really helpful to help people go, okay, like let's not necessarily take everything literally. That's important in psychedelics. Yeah.
As Terence McKenna used to say, psychedelics seem to foster funny ideas. Um,
Yeah.
and, sometimes we have really great insights, really great ideas that come through, but sometimes we also need to like learn discernment and go,
Yeah.
maybe that's not, something I should be paying attention to all the time. And
Mm,
I think that's a really important skill that we should all learn. Like, how do we discern information that comes through to us? When do we believe it as like ultimate truth, or when do we believe it as like something, okay, this is like interesting, maybe I could like shelf it and come back to it later at another point.
yeah. I think I've spoken about this before on the podcast, but I had in the journey at Monash, I had this thing come up that said you should learn to sing. And I
Mm,
was like, that's weird. I can't sing. I don't I don't know about that. That doesn't sound like something that I want to do. And
yeah.
but I sat with it and I thought, oh, maybe I'll call a singing teacher. And then over the months it was like, no, this is you should do the podcast. So
Mm,
that's it became this kind of different thing. That was the integration piece for me. It's like, what did that mean for you? It
right.
meant it meant this. And that feels right to me now. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Using your voice, right? And so it's like singing could be symbolic of using your voice in lots of different ways. Um,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, and that was the integration of sitting with, not acting straight away, and seeing what really felt right
Yeah. Yeah.
for
It's
me.
beautiful.
Mm.
Awesome. Well, I see that we're over an hour. This time
Yes,
just flew by here. Um,
yes.
Anything that you want to close with for today?
Yeah, maybe where people can find me. So
Yeah.
you can find me at if people want to find out anything or just get in touch, you can find me on my website, which is just Esme Dark Psychology. I'll put all of this in the show notes for you. I'm also over on Instagram, just Dr. Esme Dark. And then you can find the Clinical Psychedelic Lab at Monash. If you just Google that, you can find that as well. So you can find out about the research that we're up to. We've got so many cool projects starting next year. I've only spoken about really one of them. And next year, I'll be running a workshop for anyone in Australia. So an in-person workshop around somatic approaches to
Cool.
psychedelic therapies, and then hopefully some online workshops as well. If I have the time, it's so busy, right? Trying to do all the things,
All the
but
things.
I'm really
Yeah.
keen to do
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And I know this is also going to go out to your audience, and it's going out to our audience as well, but your podcast too, Beyond the Trip, right? So people can
Yes.
find you there.
But yeah, they can find me at Beyond the Trip podcast. And we've actually just very recently started to be on YouTube. So I've been going for about a year, about 12 episodes in, I think. I've
Nice.
got lots of
Congrats.
exciting stuff coming up. Yeah. Next year, that special that I spoke about the potential use of psychedelics at end of life. I've got some interviews, Dr. Bill Richards, who's already been on the podcast. I've already recorded some, and then Dr. Marg Ross, who did the first clinical psychedelic trial in Australia with people with end of life, people at the end of life. So yeah, lots
Amazing.
coming up. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for all the work that you're doing and showing up.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, Kyle. It's been
Yeah.
really great. It went really quickly, didn't it? Maybe we'll have to do another one sometime.
Part 2. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in as well, and we'll catch everybody later. So thank you again.